What if the way that you've been taught to parent in Christian circles has also been leading to damaging relationships with your kids, with your spouse, and even with God? That's what we are going to talk about on today's Bare Marriage podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based, biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. But you know what? The same trends that can so often make our marriage advice toxic in Christian circles also makes our parenting advice toxic. And so today we're going to have an interview with a couple who has written just an amazing new book on parenting that I hope will become the standard for what we use. So I'm excited to bring that to you in just a minute. But first, we have a couple of announcements. Our new book, The Marriage You Want, is now available for pre-order. Last winter, we asked as many of you as possible to take our marriage survey, our matched pair survey, and that is all done. The book is all written and it is coming out in March. And when you pre-order it early, you help Amazon know, hey, this book is going to sell really well, so they order more so they don't run out on launch day, which is really crucial. And also, the more people who order it, the more Amazon tends to lower the price, and other platforms lower the price too if you don't want to buy through Amazon. And when it rises up the ranks in ratings, then bookstores, other retailers tend to order it in as well because they know, oh, this is the book that's going to do well. So by pre-ordering it, you actually really help this book spread. So if you know you're going to get it anyway, and it is honestly awesome, please take a look and pre-order The Marriage You Want today. The link is in the podcast notes. And I want to say a special thank you to the group of people who made it possible for us to do that marriage survey. And that would be our patrons who give us money every month to support what we're doing for as little as $5 a month. And they get to join an amazing Facebook group where we talk about just about everything. And people are talking about their issues with faith and with finding a good church and with processing the parenting and marriage advice we've gotten. And it's also where we get to try new things out and new thoughts out. I posted a fixed it for you in the patron group the other day where I didn't know how to fix it. I just knew that I wanted to fix it. And they gave me so many great ideas that I actually published 10 different versions last week on Instagram and Facebook. And so it's a wonderful group, and you can join again for as little as $5 a month. And then there's the Good Fruit Faith Initiative of the Bosco Foundation, which is our nonprofit in the U.S. And when you give money there, that's what also funded our marriage survey. And you can get a tax-deductible receipt within the United States. So check out both of those things. The links are in the podcast notes. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn to our interview. Okay, everybody, I am about to give you an interview that I have been so excited about for I don't know, it seems like it's been like a year since I read the early version of this book to endorse it. This is awesome. And I have David and Amanda Erickson, authors of The Flourishing Family, with us today. Hi, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is going to be an awesome conversation. This is a conversation everyone loves, everyone's been waiting for. And we are going to talk about how to do parenting with the heart of Jesus.
That's right.
And not with fear. And I love it. I'm here for it. This is great. You guys, David, you are the president of, what is it? Jacksonville Christian College?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Jacksonville College. You have a PhD in theology, so you're a seminarian. You know what you're talking about. And you guys are parents. How old are your kids now?
They are 8 and 10 at this moment.
Yep, almost 9. Yeah.
Okay. All right. 2 boys, right?
2 boys. Yeah. And we started our parenting journey in foster care, actually, with
I did the
10, 11, and 15-year-old sibling group of all boys. So we've done the boy thing. Yeah.
Right. All right. And I truly, truly love this book. This is the book that I have wanted to be out there because it's talking about how to parent in a healthy way where you take into account the Bible, but you also take into account brain science and child development and peer-reviewed studies. And everyone listening is hearing, yay, 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 green check, green check, green check. So this is great. But and I want to take us through the book. You start with a quote that I'm going to ask you just to talk about, because you say this early in the book as you're setting up why you started rethinking parenting. You said, even so, as our 2 boys grew into toddlerhood and parenting became more challenging, we began to notice a very real disconnect between our actions as parents and the biblical and theological principles we claimed were most important to us. The things we said we believed about God, grace, sin, repentance, and more didn't seem to line up with how we were trying to discipline our children.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what really pushed us to rethink things. Of course, I'm a theology professor, so I'm always thinking theology. But thinking about like, okay, I want to disciple my children. I want to communicate these kinds of things. Like we're reading, these board books at that age of, different Christian concepts, and then thinking through, but my actions, like when I'm getting angry, when I'm yelling, when I'm trying to figure out how to discipline this, like my actions are not teaching them about this, this Father in heaven who loves us so much that you know, he sent his son to sacrifice himself for us. Like all of these things, this God of grace that I want to introduce my children to, the words are there, but the actions are different, and that just became a real feeling of
Tension.
tension for both of us.
Yeah.
In trying to think through, like, okay, what are we really doing here?
I would like to take a minute to thank our amazing sponsor for this podcast, and that is Ever AJ. They make the most beautiful, cute, fun, functional vegan Bible cases. And I'm totally serious. When they reached out to me to see if they could sponsor, I was so excited because now I get one, and they're amazing. They have regular floral Bible cases with lots of areas to put pens and paper and notepads, and they're just really attractive and modern looking. They also come in crossbody purses, in wristlets, and more. At Ever AJ, they're inspiring purpose and beauty with faith and function. And their mission is to provide beautiful yet functional products for women that align with their Christian values. And so they create products that enhance both practical needs and aesthetic preferences while cultivating a desire for the Lord. And honestly, it seriously is both practical and aesthetic. So please take a look at the link in the podcast notes. And if you're looking on YouTube, you'll be able to see some of these amazing products on the screen now. But when you support our sponsors, you help support our podcast, because when our sponsors do well, it's so much easier to get other sponsors, and this helps keep us on the air. So this makes an incredible Christmas gift for a woman in your life, your daughter, your sister. If you bought our Kingdom Girls Bible when they were our sponsor a couple of weeks ago, this is a great chance to get a cover for it that is so pretty. So do check out Ever AJ. The link is in the podcast notes. Yeah. And Amanda, you were talking a lot about just like, the daily frustrations when you've got little kids.
Yeah.
And you want them to behave, but then you're yelling, you're losing it. And that's not what you want to teach them.
Yeah. So in the book, I share quite a bit about my story with mom rage, which for me was a big indicator of postpartum anxiety, but it took a very long time for us to realize that that's what was going on. And so until we knew that's what I was dealing with, like there was just all this shame and guilt about why I wasn't the mom that I always thought I would be, that I wanted to be, that like in the thick of it truly desired to be. And there was just this inability to really meet the goal in really any way. Sometimes I was not I wasn't being the mom that I wanted to be. And so while we had sort of been taught like the approach to discipline needs to be calm and it needs to be, really shrouded in love and gentleness, like when my kids misbehave, like there was sort of just this innate anger and like we have to make this stop right now immediately. And so not only were we wrestling with like the actual way we were acting, but like the quote that you read, like even thinking about, okay, everything that I want to be when I'm having to discipline my children, calm and calm and in love. I'm going to do this in love. Like that's still, when we hold it up to the image of the gospel, there's some major holes in this approach. There's a major disconnect. And so that kind of, the two things definitely influenced my mom rage and being able to do it the way I thought I was supposed to, combined with like, this isn't lining up with what we believe.
Yeah. And in your book, you're trying to build step by step how we can think about forming our kids' character and shaping our kids' character and instilling wisdom in them. And it all starts with us, right? Like that's what you say at the very beginning is we can't even try to start teaching our kids wisdom until we confront things in ourselves. And that's what you're saying, like I was losing it. I didn't want to lose it. And so yeah, it does start with us. So I wonder, when you're in a grocery store and a kid is just having a meltdown in
Yeah.
the line, and you see the parent trying to get a handle on it and often yelling or, swatting or threatening or bribing, sometimes, whatever it might be. But so often the motivation when our kids are having these meltdowns, even if they're not in public, even if it's like at home and our kids are going haywire and they're not getting along, I think we feel like this reflects on me,
Oh yeah,
right?
for sure.
Like them
Hmm.
going haywire reflects on me. And so I need to clamp down on it because I don't want people to think badly of me and I don't want to think badly of me.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in parenting. Like we invest a lot of our identity into our kids' behavior. And
Hmm.
I mean, we were, I don't know if we were more prone to it. We live a fairly public life. I'm a college president in a pretty small town. So what my kids do is going to get around. And that's just reality for our family.
Yes.
And so, to make the decision like, okay, my kid's behavior is not like my report card. It is
Hmm.
not how I'm going to make my self-identity around them being well-behaved kids at all times. And to, even to recognize and to allow people to recognize like it's okay. Like your kids are still kids. Like I remember distinctly we were in church and sitting behind us was I was a seminary theology professor at the time, and sitting right behind us was the former president of the seminary. Okay,
Hmm.
and he's in church right behind us, and our kids were not doing great that particular Sunday morning. Like it was a noisy hour on our pew. Okay, not like a
They were
terrible.
little.
They were very little
Yeah.
kids. And afterward, this distinguished gentleman, he was so gracious, and he was like, "Your kids were so wonderful. It was so good
Hmm.
to see you in church this morning," because he was like, "They're kids. Like
Hmm.
kids are
Yeah.
kids." And there's nothing wrong with letting a kid be a kid, even in church, when it's not quite meeting social expectations, but
Hmm.
it's actually normal for kids to be exactly who they were. And so that's a blessing sometimes that we miss because we get so focused on like, what are people going to think about me?
Me.
And most of the
Hmm.
times people are thinking, wow, having a tough time today. I've been
Hmm.
there. And they're not making this big judgment about like, oh, you must be terrible because this is happening in public. No, we've all been there. We've
Yeah.
all had it happen to us. And for the grandparents, they know in general they turned out fine.
Yeah.
We all made it through.
Yes. Yes.
In the book,
Um,
one thing I want to just follow up on that though, because like if our identity is not going to be in our motherhood, our parenting, how well behaved our children are, I think it's really important to note that as Christians, our identity has to be securely rooted in Christ and who we
mhm,
are in Christ, because that gives us the resilience to withstand our children not making us look good.
mhm.
Those moments where maybe there are people and you can feel their judgment or it's perceived, but it for sure feels real. We have to be rooted and grounded in who Christ is and who he is calling us to be, and not in make them shape up, sit up, stand up, do
Mhm.
better right now because there are people watching. And so I just want to make sure, if we're shifting our identity and it's not about our kids' behavior, we need to know where it is, where we
Yeah,
find it.
exactly. Okay, so you guys get into how we're going to shape our kids' behavior, but like I said, you say it starts with us.
Yep.
And one of the things that I think parents can all relate to is that feeling of losing it with your kids where, yeah, they're just going haywire and you yell or you say things that you regret or you're just trying to control them. And that's not what we want. And so if it starts with us, we need to understand why we do those things, why we react that way. And you talk about the stress response cycle. So I love you getting into
Mhm.
science right away, which is great. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. You want to do it or you want
No,
me
you go
to
ahead.
So the stress
I
response
feel
cycle.
like I feel like Amanda goes through this more just from reading the book. So yeah.
Yeah. I for sure used to.
Yeah.
The stress response cycle is, I believe it's God-given. I mean,
Mhm,
it serves a very important purpose of protection and survival. But it basically starts involuntarily in the brain when the brain perceives a threat, whether
mhm,
or not that threat is legitimate and real, by the way. It's just if the brain perceives a threat, and it floods your brain and your body with all of these hormones and chemicals to make you ready to survive whatever that threat is. So to fight off, an angry dog, or to run to grab your kiddo out of the street, if they're heading that direction. It can also cause you to just sort of start appeasing the person who or the
mhm,
situation who is causing a threat. That's the fawn response. And it can also cause us to just shut down and be like, nope, I'm done. I'm
mhm,
not going to do this anymore. And when that stress response happens in the brain, our ability to differentiate, well, first of all, it causes our threat detection to be like hyper
mhm,
aware. So then it's like so many other things can be perceived as a threat, and there's not a good differentiation between what is real and valid and what is not. And when we get through the end of a stress response cycle, all those hormones like kind of naturally cleanse out of our body, our heart rate calms down, our blood pressure comes back down, we come back into a place of like peace and calm in the body, physically, biologically in our body. And the problem that I found in parenting is that there was not a complete stress cycle always happening, because just as soon
mhm,
as I got the boys, separated from hurting each other, they were maybe, letting the dog out, and we live on a busy highway and I got to go make sure the dog doesn't, run in the road. And so there were these perceived threats, and sometimes valid, but for me with the postpartum anxiety, a lot of times it was like, this is not a big a deal as your brain thinks it is. um
mhm,
like there was never a good completion of those stress cycles. And so there was just this buildup of tension and stress and anger and rage biologically, like in my brain and body. And I had to learn to recognize like this is something that's actually going on. It's not simply a lack of moral character. It's not simply a
mhm,
lack of spiritual maturity. Like I was still praying all the prayers. I was still reading my Bible. I was trying to do Bible studies and like, Lord, take this away. And there was a missing element because I needed to proactively do activities that were going to help my body finish these stress response cycles.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And that's so key because yeah, you can just picture, right? Um, your kid starts yelling at the other kid, and then you see that as a threat. And so you get
Yep.
into fight response. And so then you start fighting back, and your heart rate elevates, and that causes them to do the same thing. And it's just
Yep.
this terrible vicious cycle. Yeah. And if you don't have a chance to get out of that, then you're just so easily triggered by anything that happens.
Yeah.
You know, and just to show you how practical this book is, I want to read to you one of the little sidebars because the book is filled with sidebars about really, really practical ways that you can put all of this into practice. And they have 8 ways to complete a stress cycle, even with little kids. Okay, so here I'm sharing with you parenting gold here, everybody. So listen to this. Okay, 8 ways. One, schedule a dance off with your little ones before supper. I love that because yeah, when we get our heart rate going up, it does calm the body's trauma response. Two, take 10 minutes during nap time to practice mindful breathing. Just get your body back. 3, schedule an at-home date night and watch comedy that makes you belly laugh because laughing gets you out of that. 4, go for a run, jog, or swim. 5, paint and hide rocks with your children. 6, find art lessons online that you can do with your child because again, doing these creative things also gets you out of that. 7, let your spouse get quality one-on-one time with your kids while you go out to dinner with your best friends because social stuff can get us out of that. And 8, jump on a trampoline with your kiddos. So I love that. Thank you for those. Very practical. Okay. So now so once we've dealt with our own stuff, we understand, why we're reacting badly. Um, let's move on to the idea of fear-based consequences that we so often have with our children. Because this is once you've dealt with your stuff, let's talk about how we often discipline our kids. And so often we're focused on punishing them and scaring them and threatening them.
Yeah.
Do that again and I'll give you a spanking, whatever it might look like. And you talk about thinking about the long game here. And that if we go back to those stress response cycles, those trauma responses, a lot of those trauma responses actually look like obedience in children.
They do. Yeah.
So tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, can fear work as a discipline tactic? Sure, you can in certain instances scare a kid into not doing that again. But most punishment is intended to either scare them enough to make them think twice about doing it again, right? Or make them feel bad enough about it to not want to do it again. It's fear and shame. That is what punishment is generally designed to create in our children. And that can short term work because God designed into all of us a natural fear and stress response. That's not bad. That is a survival
The brain
thing.
responds more quickly to fear and danger stimuli than secure and safe stimuli.
Yeah. And so when when things are genuinely unsafe, being afraid is the correct response from a parent or from a child. Okay. The issue comes in when that's not actually what's happening. And so as a parent, we are trying to artificially create that fear. And what we're hoping is that they will be afraid of that behavior. But the problem is we are the ones enforcing that fear. And so what we bleed into is that they become afraid of us just as much as they're afraid of that behavior. And that then begins to create, distance and disconnect into the relationship, what makes it much, much harder to actually get to our real goal. Because our real goal is actually a relationship of honor, a relationship of trust, and a relationship of obedience. Okay. But that's all built on trust and connection, not on fear. Fear is a very short-term goal, and what I encourage parents to do is look out 20 years, right? You've got a 4-year-old right now. Think about 24. At 24, when this little girl is coming back to your home as a woman, right? What relationship are you hoping to have? When she's 34 and you're hoping she's bringing your grandkids over to visit, what relationship of honor are you wanting to have? And what are you doing now at 4 years old to build into that relationship of honor and trust? And sometimes that means, okay, we need to adjust what we're doing here and now to build that relationship of trust so that it'll be there in the teen years when it's going to get really tested, and it'll be there in the adult years when we're looking forward to this long-term, lifelong relationship of honor that carries on through the rest of our life.
David wrote one simple sentence in the book on the chapter on obedience. Like, obedience is for the short term, but honor, it potentially is for a lifetime. And how we go about teaching our children about obedience and to obey can very much impact that lifelong honor potential,
Yeah.
because we are lording power and authority over them. There's a very real possibility that their esteem of us is going to diminish the
Right.
more we try to control and coerce them.
Right. And I think this is such a big point um, that we need people to hear, because this is the fundamental shift that needs to happen in Christian parenting teachings. Because so much of Christian parenting teachings is based on you need to control this child who is rebellious and sinful, um, so that you can get rid of that rebelliousness and sinfulness, because they will never go in the right direction unless you come down hard on their innate rebellious sinful nature. And that actually isn't true. It's not true biblically, it's not true scientifically, it's not true in terms of child
Bad
development.
theology.
Yeah.
Bad
But
theology.
this is what we've been taught. And I think so many parents are scared. We're scared that if we don't come down hard on their little rebelliousness, then we're setting our kids up, to make terrible decisions and in the future and all this stuff. So we have to come down hard if we're going to be Christian parents. But what does God do? Like, how does God treat us?
Yeah, it's his kindness that leads us to repentance.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, in some ways we set ourselves up to try to do the work of the Holy Spirit, right?
Oh,
Like
Mhm.
I am going to somehow, through my discipline or through my punishments, convince my child to not be a sinner. And it's like,
Right.
that's just not how it works, right? This is the work of Christ, that we are, you know, trying to encourage and nurture in our children, but we can't actually do it ourselves.
The other way that it's not like Christ is that, Christ says over and over again, it's the heart that counts. Right? It's what stems from the heart that is important. And so as parents, we need to be addressing the heart, not the outward behavior in the same way. And so much of parenting is focused on behavior modification so that we get these short-term results, like you say, short-term success, but you don't necessarily get the long-term effects, because you may get a kid to obey you instantly, but that doesn't mean that you've shaped their character, because
Yeah,
they haven't learned to trust you. They haven't learned, to bond with you, or that they actually want to obey. They just simply want to not get punished.
right.
Yeah. I mean, Ephesians 6 talks about children obey your parents in the Lord, and it talks about this being the first commandment with a blessing. And so, I mean, I do want my children to have that blessing. And I want other people for their children to have that blessing of obeying their parents. I mean, it is kind of just a fundamental reality. Parents are older, they've seen some more things than kids usually
Mhm.
have. They have wisdom to share, and following in that wisdom generally will turn out better
Mhm.
than rejecting and rebelling against that wisdom. That's just a general principle truth, okay? And so I want children to experience that blessing of following after their parents. But that's all built on their heart being able to trust, right? To have that genuine, heartfelt obedience, to not just, because God's not just interested in the external compliance of people, okay? He's not just interested, did you do the sacrifice? Did you pray the prayer? Did you do the? He is interested in the heart. And if we want our children to truly be obeying us, we have to be after their heart, and we have to be nurturing that heartfelt obedience. And that's going to take much more than trying to control their body. It is
Mhm.
going to require nurturing a trusting, connected relationship that allows them to follow along after us in obedience. No, it won't be perfect. Kids won't be perfect. in following after us, but we're building that foundation for them then to be able to do that. And we start out very young, and as they get older, I mean, so many parents who pursue this path, they reap so many fruits of just joy and
Mhm.
obedience in their children because they've laid this foundation where their kids intuitively trust them and have no question, like, of course mom and dad have my best interest in mind. I may not still want to do it because
Mhm.
ABC, but they have that foundation, that knowledge going in.
And I can honestly say this. We never disciplined our kids as teenagers. I just don't think that we did. We just had a great relationship with our girls as teens.
Mhm.
Because we were really connected and they just made really good choices. And I know a lot of that is it doesn't work out that way for everybody. Everybody has kids. Kids can go off the rails even if you did everything right. So I'm not trying to say that that was
Right.
entirely due to what we did. I'm just saying this idea that teenagehood is going to be terrible, it actually doesn't need to be, because if you've built that connection and that trust in those younger years, it can actually be quite fun.
Yes.
I want
It absolutely can.
Can I circle back just to the instant obedience? Because our boys
Yes.
and I actually had a conversation about this over the summer. We were reading in Mark, and I think it's in Mark chapter 1. It might be in chapter 2. Jesus, he comes upon a man who is possessed by a demon,
Hmm.
and Jesus commands the demon to leave the man, and the demons obey, like instant obedience. And I was reading this with my boys, and I was like, hold up. Because, like, if the faith tradition that I was raised in would have used this as, look, even the demons obey Jesus instantly, which means that's what we need to do. When
Hmm.
really the reality of it is these demons do not trust Jesus. They are not going to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, at the end of time. They are not a part of God's working out his vision for the world and humanity and the
Hmm.
ushering in the kingdom of heaven. Like, they are not a part of any of that, and they obey him. There has to be more to God's
Hmm.
desire for obedience than just doing what I said because I said so, because they have no relationship with
Hmm.
Jesus and they obeyed him. Like, obedience without relationship, without trust, without um honor, that's nothing. There's no fruit in that. They are demons. There's no
Hmm.
fruit of that. And so I just remember reading that. That's not in the book.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
bonus. But, like, there has to be more to obedience than just to obedience to Christ, and therefore our children's obedience to us than just like, you do what I say when I say so.
it
Because
reminds me of the Shiny Happy People documentary that we've talked about on this podcast before, and some of the Duggar women's memoirs that they've written since. But they had that instant obedience, and when you actually look at what happened to them as kids, it was like you said, so often our kids' obedience is actually a trauma response. If the trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, well, freeze and fawn can look a lot like just obedience,
yeah,
even when it's just fear,
yeah,
right? It's not actually changing anything.
yeah,
And even flight can too, to a certain extent, if they go to their room or they get out of the situation, right? Like that can look like, oh, look, they're obeying, they're good kids. And that's what everyone thought of the Duggar kids, but they were reacting out of trauma.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and see, this where like quote traditional parenting methods, like they seem to work for a moment
mhm,
until you have a spicy kid who has a fight response, right?
yes.
And then it's like, oh, this isn't working.
right.
Uh,
And then we label that kid as difficult when really, like, maybe all of our children are actually responding in a stress response, but some of them
Yes.
the way we want them to. And our spicy kiddo, it's a fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the point instead is to work on connection, because if we have that connection, we can grow the trust, and then obedience comes because they actually want to obey us. They feel connected to us. They want to do what's good. They want our approval. They want to be good. Which is the way God treats us too. And in this section on connection, you talk about attachment, you talk about what secure attachment looks like and how kids are designed to actually need us you
Mhm.
know I remember when I was a young woman, probably in my late 20s. I had two little girls, and there was a family in our church that had a lot of kids, right? Like a lot of kids. And in those days, I kind of assumed, oh, wow, they must be super Christians then because they have, so many kids. And the dad told me that whenever a baby was 6, 7, 8 months, and they would throw the spoon off the high chair, or they would try to grab the spoon when you're trying to be fed, he would smack them. And that taught them that they weren't supposed to do that. And I heard this and I thought, wow, that's really harsh. Like I never did that, but it never I thought, well, he must really know because he's got all of these kids, but children are too young to make that connection at that point. And so all you are teaching your child is to be afraid of you and to break connection. It reminds me last night on Facebook, we're recording this at the beginning of September, but last night I posted I fixed it for you of a Gary Thomas quote, which talked about how, if you're in the middle of making love and the baby cries, the wife has to get up and get the baby, and suddenly the power shifts back to the wife because, now the man takes second place or whatever. I mean, so many things wrong with that quote. Um, but
Yeah, the husband could get up and take the
yeah,
baby, but
exactly. The husband can get up too. And believe me, she doesn't feel super powerful right then. But the power shifts back. And I had a number of
Come
people
back with
say,
a Wonder Woman outfit.
yeah, I had a lot of people comment saying, yeah, my husband told me when our kids were, babies and they were crying that we had to finish making love first because I had to show him, and the baby needed to learn that the husband was still the most important in the family and the marriage relationship was the most important. Um, and you hear this a lot in Christian circles. Let the baby cry. Don't come to them immediately. Um, they have to learn they're not the center of the universe. But the thing is, a child is the center of the universe because they're incapable of thinking of it any other way.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for the first 4 months of life, the infant brain does not even recognize that it is yet separate from the mother's body.
Yeah.
Like, no, you that child needs to be responded to as quickly as is possible. And like I say that with the
Mhm.
mom in mind who has postpartum anxiety and is like, I'm going poop and my baby's screaming and I feel like I have
Yes.
to go as quickly as
Yes.
like, don't put that pressure on yourself. Like you have to
No.
do what you have to do. But the
Yeah.
baby, it don't purposefully ignore it to teach it a lesson. It doesn't know that it's not part of your body for the first four
Mhm.
months.
well,
Yes, and the great thing, let me just say this about attachment science too, is that you do not have to be perfect to have
Right.
yeah,
secure attachment. You
Yeah.
just have to, the kid needs to know that, my needs are going to more or less be met, and that's fine. So you do not have to be perfect. Yes. Sorry,
Right.
go ahead, David.
well, and I mean that gets into this kind of bigger point about like child development and just understanding how children develop over time, and like, no, your 2-year-old does not really have empathy for that your 3-year-old or 4-year-old. That's not really possible
Your
for
4-year-old
them.
doesn't have empathy for the 2-year-old either.
No, that's why there's so much contention
Yes.
in these young years. Um, and just and so we can spend a lot of our time trying to compel our kids to develop faster, right?
Mhm.
To become older than they actually are. And it doesn't work. Okay. We're never going to discipline our child's brain into becoming more than it is. They are who they are. This is a process designed by God. It is slow. In the thick of parenting, there are weeks when you're like, when is this ever going to end? Because
Mhm.
this thing we're doing right now, where, my child just figured out they can take off their diaper, and oh my Lanta, it is terrible. And we're cleaning up so many things. And then, a month later, it's all over.
Mhm.
Life has moved on, they have changed, and it's all in the rearview mirror. But in those moments, it just feels like
This
forever,
never ends.
and it's
Mhm.
never going to end. um and so that's when, we have to go back to, okay, my identity is in Christ, not in what my child is doing.
Mhm.
um with Christ, we're going to get through this. We can figure out a way to work through this. Um, and and by God's grace, we'll make it, and this child will grow out of this, which is, this is the one thing that like grandparents know that parents don't always know. Most of the time they grow out of it.
Mhm. Yeah. But also, when your kid is doing something that's annoying you, or when they're biting, when they're 14 months old, right? That isn't a sin thing. They're
Yeah,
not, it's not a sin instinct. It's a, wow, this feels really good to bite.
right.
And yeah, and I don't know how to regulate my emotions yet.
Yeah, we have a resource, a free resource on our webpage, called Ages and Stages, and it's really just like child development for Christian parents. And when we were researching for that, and preparing for that, I was doing a little bit of research and I had not heard this before, so it's not in the book, but toddlers do not actually have the capacity to differentiate between something is valuable because it is alive, it's a person, it's, you know, energized by the spirit of God or anything like that, and an object, like something, an inanimate object, like they don't differentiate between this is an animal and this is a plastic car, right? Like they don't have the developmental capacity for that yet. And I was like, well, I probably wouldn't have been quite so wigged out when my kids were toddlers if I had known that, like some of these
Yeah.
behaviors of like, why are you like torturing our dog by pulling her ears every single day?
Mhm.
Okay, you don't actually recognize and put it all the pieces together yet that there's a difference between this living animal and, the toys over here that we set up for you to pull on,
Mhm.
that we gave you to pull on. And it, I think uh the lack of knowledge of child development in Christian circles is fundamentally, it puts Christian parents at a disadvantage because it gives them a reason to view everything as sin, and to pair that with just a twisted theology that somehow we are responsible for absolving our children of sin. It puts such a burden and pressure. And so this is something that we realize for ourselves. Parents who are using fear as their primary method of discipline, they are often doing it out of fear themselves, and they may not even realize it. Like
Yeah.
they are living with fear and this pressure and this stress themselves, and they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now to get back to the dog, okay, you
Right.
can actually teach your kids not to pull on a dog's ear.
Oh yes.
Yes.
So,
So yeah, there's a reality of like, okay, in child development, they're only so far along here, but they're just so we can expect these behaviors to happen. That doesn't mean they are acceptable
Right.
or that we need to live with them and we need to let them
Wait,
mistreat our
wait, I
dog.
want to hear her. It sounds like you have a tangible, like very practical way.
well, I mean, no, you can just teach them that they can't do that, or they can't be in the same room with the dog. I mean, you can just protect your dog. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Like,
Okay. I
you
thought
can
you had like a
distract them.
magic.
No, you can say, this is what we pull on. Like you can give them a special toy that they get to
Yeah,
pull on or whatever. But yes, you don't approach it as how could you possibly torture the dog? But
right.
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
look
Or
at how
you're doing this
Rover.
after I told you not to, so you're disobedient.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, protect your dog. Yeah.
Yes,
I know.
absolutely. Protect your dog.
Our daughter Rebecca had the tiniest little Yorkshire Terrier. It's passed away now, but yes, our grandson just did not was not nice to that poor little dog. And so they had to protect the dog. Yeah. But
And I mean, you spend a lot of time throughout childhood teaching that like, no, that is not okay. Even though in the back of my mind, we're like, oh, yeah, kids do that. That's
yeah.
actually normal. That's
Mhm.
not okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we need to teach and we need to encourage and we need discipline
Mhm.
so that they begin to learn to differentiate between this is okay, this is not okay. Whether we're talking
Mhm.
about actions, we're talking about words, the way we're phrasing things, it gets more complex as they get older, but still there is that important part of discipline. Like, no,
Mhm.
this is not socially acceptable. This is not okay. And we're not going to keep continuing to do this.
Yeah, you just do it out of kindness. You have another great sidebar on what gentle firmness looks like. Because that's what you call it. Like it's like we're going to be firm, but we're going to do it in a gentle way. And you say for toddlers, this might sound like you are so sad to leave the park. I understand. I'm going to carry you to the car because it is time to go. So if they're like putting
Yeah.
up a tantrum, you still carry them, but you tell them that you understand, right?
Yeah.
For young children, it might sound like, I can tell you're upset and I want to understand why. Match my voice so I can understand you clearly. So, like,
Yeah.
helping them talk in a reasonable tone. You go on from that, which I love. But you talk about how the key to all of this is remembering the three C's and that it goes in a certain order, right? You
Yep.
co-regulate together,
Yeah.
you connect together, and then you communicate.
Yep.
So if we're going to teach our kids something, which is the communication part. We usually jump right to the communicate. This is what you're doing wrong. You can't do this. You need to
Right.
stop. But we miss those two things. I have a story. I'm going to let you guys tell me what you think, but let me tell you a beautiful story, okay? This is like my most proud grandparent moment of my son-in-law and my grandson. But my daughter, Rebecca, used to have horrible issues with temper tantrums, and we didn't understand the concept of co-regulating or emotionally regulate when she was 2. And so we would do the timeouts. We were trying to teach her that you cannot control us. But in so doing, we were trying to control her, and it just never worked. It was one of our worst parenting times, but they didn't really know better in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So I'm so glad they know better now. But Alex was 3 and dinner was served and he didn't like something and he was about to have a meltdown. And Connor leaned in and they touched foreheads and Alex put his hands on Connor's cheeks, and they just breathed together and then they talked afterwards. It's like, oh
Oh,
my gosh, this is so beautiful.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And it's kind of healing, to see it happening in the future generations.
Yeah.
And just to know that your grandson, that is how his brain is being wired right now.
Mhm.
Like how redemptive
Mhm.
of a story it is.
Yeah.
And
Because
that
like
you get
if
to
they
see
had
that you get to
if
see the redemption.
yeah, and if they had jumped in to getting mad at him for starting to lose it because he didn't like the food,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have been able to handle it. But after they did that co-regulation, they could then have a conversation about how you need to eat 3 bites anyway.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Sometimes co-regulation, the ones we remember are the ones that took really long, okay?
Hmm.
But a lot of moments of co-regulation are very quick.
Hmm.
They don't take very long at all to just connect with a kid for a few seconds,
Hmm.
and help their brain and their emotions head on to a different track, right? And start
Hmm.
going in a way that instead of escalating begins to de-escalate, and then we can get to that communication part.
So much
Mhm.
faster. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to just for your listeners to explain one quick thing of why it goes in this order. And that's
Hmm.
because when the brain is dysregulated or in a stress response, it is not going to be able to learn the really important lesson that we as parents are trying to teach as effectively or as efficiently. And so when we try to teach them the lesson before their brain is in a calm and secure state, we're actually working against ourselves. And
Hmm.
and for kids whose stress responses is freeze or fawn, we don't even know because we just think, oh, they obeyed us, like, oh, they did the thing. But they're not actually learning the long-term valuable lesson of wisdom and understanding and perspective taking and problem solving, because we're trying to teach it while they're dysregulated. And they need
Mhm.
us to come in and co-regulate with them, like calm their body, calm their nervous system, connect with them so they know that they are safe, they are loved, they are protected by us. Even in moments of discipline, even in moments that are hard, that we are their protector. And because of that, trust is established or it's reinforced. They feel safe, and now they're ready to actually learn the thing that we
Hmm.
want them to learn.
Okay, so what does this look like? So let's say you've got a 7-year-old boy
Yeah.
and he's just been roughhousing and he's jumping all over the furniture and he's hurting his 5-year-old sister. And you've told him not to do this before, but she's crying and he's looking at you like he knows he's in trouble. How do you co-regulate with him?
Oh, start with sister if she's hurt, actually.
Okay, yes, yes, okay. Yes,
Physical needs first.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. And also that gives I mean one of the things we can unintentionally do is we can give a lot of emotional attention to misbehavior. And so we're initially giving our emotional attention to the one that got hurt. Okay.
Mhm.
And so they're getting the attention first. The 7-year-old may still be bouncing around on the couch. I don't know. You know, it just kind of depends on how badly sister is hurt and how long this is going to take for her to calm down. But then we're going to switch our attention to the 7-year-old.
Yeah, and I mean at 7, you can even be like, "Hey, I can tell you want to bounce, go get on the trampoline or go get the yoga ball. I'll help you in just a minute. I'm going to take care of your sister." Like have the yes of what their body is like their body has physical momentum. And
Mhm.
instead of trying to put a immediate stop to it, try to bridge them over to what is an acceptable way to use that momentum. So like we have a very bouncy kiddo. He's super wiggly and like he watches movies on a yoga ball and like bounces while we watch the movie. And so we have an outside trampoline and we have a yoga ball for inside and like give the child the yes of how they can keep moving their body in that way because that is going to naturally, actually, if it's jumping, it'll help them start de-escalating because that's a regulating rhythmic motion. Um, and instead of like putting on a hard stop, which is going to invite a power struggle, which if they're escalated, they're probably going to say yes to, it just allows them to keep momentum in a safe and appropriate way.
Right. And then you connect after that. So what would that
And then
look
you connect
like?
for that. Yeah. Oh man, connection is that's so specific to
Mhm.
kids.
Mhm.
Um, for our kiddo who's super wiggly, it would really look like coming sort of alongside him in the
Mhm.
movement and maybe getting on the trampoline with him, and bouncing a couple of times and then like laying down on the trampoline with him and
Mhm.
look at the leaves or see if we can see animals in the clouds or
Right.
whatever, and
A-
and we're talking like 2 or 3 minutes. We're not talking 20-minute thing. We're talking about, hey, I'm coming out here and your child, if you send your kiddo out to get on the trampoline and
Mhm.
you've taken care of sister and you have established this relationship that is maybe not completely devoid of fear,
Mhm.
like mom and dad still lose it sometimes, but in general, your response is calm, confident connection. Then when they see you coming out the door, they're not scared of you. Like they're going
Right.
to stay on the trampoline and anticipate you coming and not be scared that you're coming to teach them a lesson. They're
Right.
going to like be like a magnet. Mom's coming out to the trampoline. Okay. And
Yeah.
so then you have this relationship that is secure. You spend a couple of minutes with them, and then you lay down and you start talking about what happened and you ask questions. Tell me what happened. How
Mhm.
could it have gone differently? What would it look like if you had gone and just jumped on the trampoline and let her keep, coloring instead of picking on her? Like you
Mhm.
with a 7-year-old, with a toddler, you can't do that, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
not
Right. Right.
capacity for that. But with a 7-year-old, like you can start asking good questions, try and learn
Mhm.
their perspective, help him know what to do next time, and then practice it. Then be like, all right, let's go inside and try it. Let's go practice.
Yeah.
Let's practice
And
for next time. So next
yeah,
time we
and
know.
you talk too about how to make amends and how to walk through those processes. So yeah, make amends with sister, and we can't go into all of that here, but that's all in the book. It's really
Yeah.
good. But yeah, that's what it looks like because if you jump right into yelling at them about that, you're not actually going to change the trajectory of their behavior long term. And that's the issue because you want them to want to treat sister well. You want them to want to not destroy the house. Like,
And I just want to say, like, from personal experience, like, we have a very real story of our boys, like, learning to pick on each other because it gets connection. Like, they're going to pick on each other for connection with each other, right?
mhm,
And that those bonding hormones, they'll come out when they're, really intense with each other. And I remember they were probably 6 and 7, or maybe 7 and 8. And I was like, hey guys, look, like, this is why y'all are annoying each other. Like, the brain science of why y'all are annoying each other. And these hormones, you can get them in a different way that doesn't escalate your brother. And here's like a list of 4 or 5 things you can do. And one of them was to pet your dog. And so all I remember, like, our younger son, for weeks, he would be like, I'm getting happy hormones from the dog. Like, he kind of like start to go down the path of, really don't want to have to deal with this right now. And then he'd like immediately be like, no, I'm going to go get happy hormones from the dog, is what he would like. That is how he would say it. And then one time his brother was having a really rough time, and he called our dog over and was like, hello, it was like a cleanup on aisle 9 type of statement. He's like, we need happy hormones in the bathroom. Like,
That's so precious.
and you teach them how their brain works, and
Mm-hmm.
they know what to do instead. Like, they're disciplining themselves at that point,
Yeah.
like they are
Yeah.
teaching themselves what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Now let's get into one of my favorite parts of your book, which
Okay.
is you address spanking.
We do.
And I love this because you address it from the Bible and from child development, and you use peer-reviewed studies. And so I want to delve into this quite a bit. I want to start by playing a clip. And this was sent to me by someone in this congregation. I'm not going to name the congregation or the pastor. I do have a YouTube link, just so you know where I got it from, and people could do their own research if they want. But my purpose is not to beat up on this particular pastor. But I think this is so common, this kind of message that Christians are hearing, which is you need to spank because it's biblical. The Bible tells you that you need to hit your children. And if you don't, you're in sin. And so let's just listen to this pastor.
When I was dating Angela, we were engaged actually. We had many conversations about how many kids we'd have and what our parenting philosophy would be and how we would go about disciplining and punishing our children. And we did a Bible study on God's model for punishing children. And much of what we covered in that Arrows series last month, I went over with her. We talked about the importance of spanking a young one. And if you don't like that, again, take it up with the Bible. Don't take it up with me. It's all throughout the book of Proverbs, and it's commanded for us to do that. And Angela and I were on the same page. My loving parents are here this morning. They raised me spanking my little behind, and I needed my little behind spanked. Amen? And I'm glad they did spank my little behind. You say, well, didn't that damage the relationship with your parents? They're here this morning, aren't they? Amen? And I love them and they love me. But I grew up getting spanked and my siblings getting spanked. And my brother James, little rascal, he's now a missionary in Honduras. When one of us was getting spanked, he'd put his ear against the door to listen and hear it happen. And he'd walk away laughing. He's anyway, good memories. But Angela didn't grow up that way. She didn't grow up getting spanked by her mother and father. And so intellectually, she agreed with me. But then when it came time for me to go in their bedroom and spank one of the kids, emotionally, she disagreed with me. And I can remember many times she'd be standing in the door frame like this. Don't spank them. They're sorry. They won't do it again. They're good kids. Please don't spank them, please. And I would look at Angela and I'd say, you need to get out of my way right now. Don't make me forcefully remove you from that door frame. And she would move and I would go in and I would spank them. And after some time, she began to see, yeah, this works.
Okay. So, a lot of red flags there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's several things. One is that there's an assumption about what the Bible says, that the Bible is definitely pro spanking. and that's
Mhm.
a uninterrogated assumption that's not been hermeneutically proven. Then there is I guess the overriding of the mother,
Yeah.
uh, the the forcing of compliance on the mother's behalf, even though her intuition is saying, no, this is not the way. This is not the way to discipline
Yeah.
this child, and that's introducing all kinds of tension into the marriage. It's
Mhm.
going to introduce all kinds of tension into the parenting relationship, into the relationship these children are going to have with their mother as opposed to their father. And I mean, children naturally differentiate. You know, there's mama's boys and daddy's boys, and mama's girls and daddy's
Mhm.
girls, and all of that naturally happens. But this is really amping that up, where
Mhm.
the mother is the protector and the father is uh, the threat.
Yeah.
Okay. And long term, that's really not going to work out well
Yeah.
uh, for anybody in this family.
Well, I think it's interesting that he says that, long term, look, I still like my parents, but the story that he told about his brother who used to laugh hearing his siblings spanked, that's
Normal.
strange. Yeah.
Well, and that
Yeah.
may be a childish
Well, it
threat
could be.
response.
It
Like
can be.
Yes.
that's one thing that it can drive you a little bit bonkers as
Yeah,
a parent,
that's
because
true.
you're being really serious and you're trying to
Mhm.
communicate to your child that what you just did was really serious and bad, and
Mhm.
they are laughing
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
stress response.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like the nervous giggle, like adults do, or try and make
Mhm.
a joke and maybe not really an appropriate time. That can be a
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
stress attempt at relieving the stress of the situation.
Yeah. But also this whole idea that you have to spank to get your kids to turn out well. But his wife wasn't
Yeah,
spanked, and he liked the way his wife turned
right.
out.
Right. I
Like,
noticed that too. I was like, well, this is interesting.
mhm.
The thing that stood out to me was that he said the words that the Bible commands us to
Mhm.
spank.
Mhm.
And I like in our book, I think we lay out a pretty solid case that it is most likely um, from, you know, biblical research, Jewish research, it's most likely that the rod verses in Proverbs are actually speaking about teenagers and not young
Yes.
children. But
Yes.
even if we're going to like give a very broad application, and
Mhm.
maybe there is room to say that the rod could be applied to young children, the Proverbs are not commands. Like
Mhm.
that's where I was just like, that is a flat out lie that the Bible
Mhm.
commands parents to spank their children.
Yep.
It isn't a command.
Yep. Exactly. You have a great chart in there on the false equivalency, Solomon's rod versus modern spanking. And
Okay.
we'll put it on the screen now so people can see it, but if you're watching on YouTube. But yeah, like, I've heard many scholars say this, that there's many different words for child in Hebrew that we translate child. Um, and the one that is used is not the one for like toddler or
Mhm.
young child. It really is more for a teenager. And yet we use these verses to say that we're supposed to be hitting um, our very small children. And that is not anywhere that that the Bible says that. So it is really scary. But when we turn and again, if you want to look into the biblical reasons why these verses are not saying that, they really do lay it out so well in the Flourishing Family. So yeah, David and Amanda do that really well. So please get the book. It's really worth it even just for that, although it's worth it for the whole thing. Um, but I also love that you quoted Gershoff and other studies. So Elizabeth Gershoff is famous for her huge meta-analysis of spanking,
Yeah,
where I think there were 160,000 kids included in that study,
right.
and basically the conclusion was that spanking is either negative or neutral, but never positive. So in
Mhm.
other words, if you were spanked and you think you turned out well, as this pastor was saying, it was despite the spanking, not because of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That was I didn't know if we were going to circle back to that or not. I do want to say But I believe that parents who that there are adult children today who were spanked, even maybe harshly by their parents, and they still have a good relationship with their parents. I do not think
Yeah.
that those two things are inherently or always mutually exclusive. And that is because I believe in the redemptive power of Christ. Like he
Mhm.
can redeem any story and he
Mhm.
can restore any relationship. And I genuinely believe that. But anytime we take the way we were parented or the generation above us takes the way they parented us and attributes that mostly or all to how well someone turned out, we are very much misapplying. Like we're giving honor where it is not exclusively due. Like there
Mhm.
is honor your father and mother, but also like the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives is powerful and active, and we cannot misapply and misattribute the goodness of Christ to our parents spanking us. And that's why we're good contributing members of society today who go to
Mhm.
church every Sunday. Like, no, like we have to hold space for the work of God in
Right.
us.
Mhm. Mhm. And like I said earlier, with attachment, you can have a secure attachment with a parent who spanked you because they don't have to be perfect to have secure attachment. And
Yeah,
so, um, yeah, like it's not that that this automatically meant that you didn't turn out well. It's just it could
right.
have been different. And what if it was better? And don't we want better for our kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to encourage, parents today, like if you spanked your child 10 minutes before you turned on this podcast, okay?
Mhm.
This does not mean your child can't turn out. This does not mean
Right.
that you have ruined this
Mhm.
relationship and there's nothing you can do to fix it.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you can start from wherever you are, whether you've got a 2-year-old or a 12-year-old, and you can start from where you are and you can start, putting Jesus
Rebuilding
at the center
attachment.
of your parenting, rebuilding that connected relationship. It's going to
Mhm.
look very different at different ages. But it absolutely can be done.
Yeah.
And your children will be grateful for you taking this thing that either is a negative in their life, whether they can communicate that or not,
Mhm.
or at best it's a neutral in their life, um, going ahead and taking it off the table.
Yeah.
But I would say, one thing that's super important is, we made a decision when our son was 2, I think he was 2,
Mine too.
that we took spanking off the table.
Completely.
And
It
we
was
just,
never an option after that.
but you have to decide what is on the table, okay? Because
Mhm.
kids aren't going to stop misbehaving just because you
Mhm.
stop spanking them,
Mhm.
okay?
Mhm.
They're not going to stop needing godly discipline. Um, and so, when you take a tool out of your toolbox, as a parent, you need to put other tools in to help you guide, encourage, nurture, and to help you and their siblings and whomever else
Yeah.
is in this family.
And we
Uh,
have a quick reference guide of like maybe 15 or so
right?
parenting tools at the end of the book and
Mhm.
the ages that they're maybe most effective for and what it might look like. So if someone's listening and they're like, okay, if I'm convicted to not spank anymore, then what do I do? We did our best to give you some ideas.
Yes, and you talk a lot about how to figure out, natural consequences, logical like how to figure out what consequences we can have in this situation, and yes, a lot of other tools, which I thought was really good. Um, I think there's a misunderstanding. People often say, "Oh, well, if we get rid of spanking, then we're just going to let kids run wild," as if
Yeah.
spanking and discipline are synonyms.
Mhm.
And they're actually not. Spanking is punishment.
Yep.
It's not discipline.
Yeah.
Discipline, think of discipline as the same word as discipleship, the same word as discipleship, where it's about teaching and that connection.
Yeah.
Whereas punishment is about control, and we shouldn't be trying to control our kids.
Yeah. I have this is another interesting story that's not in the book because it's pretty recent. We ended up taking YouTube off of our smart TV because not because our kids accessed anything they weren't supposed to, but because there was one channel that our oldest was watching, and we just kind of noticed he was picking up some of the
Hmm.
idiosyncrasies of this YouTuber, and it was not aligning with our family values. with the culture of our home. So we had a family meeting. We talked about it. We told him that we wanted to take off take off YouTube for a month, and see if there was, and do an experiment. Like, is there a difference in how we as a whole, but especially you, treat your brother and others, and how you speak to each other? And so we took it off for a month in that, and he agreed, like, okay, yep, everybody's on board, like buy-in from everybody. During that month, he had a friend come over to spend the night, and there was just a situation where one of our boys did not immediately obey getting off the trampoline. Like, circle back to the trampoline story. There wasn't instant obedience. And the friend said he should get grounded. He didn't obey right away. And my oldest said, we don't get grounded. And in my mind, I was like, dang, like, he currently does not have access to YouTube, which some children and some families would think of that as grounding from YouTube, right? But he was bought into this experiment, and let's learn, let's gather more data to see, is this actually influencing you or not? And here's why. And he understands the reason behind it, and was willing to be an active participant in that. And he's not receiving this as punishment. Like, he's not receiving it as I'm grounded from YouTube. He's receiving it with love and with correction, and with let's learn to do better and see if this helps us do better. And it was just really interesting to kind of see that dynamic play out with him saying that, because he, like, at that time did not have access to YouTube, and he didn't feel like he was grounded.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting.
Yeah. I love that. That's really beautiful, because that's what we're looking for, right? Like, when you think about the long term, you don't want your kids to just be compliant and to just obey to get out of something bad. You want them to learn wisdom. You want them to learn to make good decisions when you're not there.
Right.
You certainly don't want, I mean, there's the two problem areas, right? One is that they just obey anybody and don't learn to think for themselves at all, which can really make someone open up for abuse. And the other is, as soon as the control that you have over them is gone, they'll just do anything.
Right.
And rebel, right? So you can have the super compliant versus the super rebellious. You can have either extreme can come out of this kind of controlling parenting, and we don't want either of those things.
Right.
I want to throw this back to you too. I was in a conversation, several different conversations with different people over the weekend about spanking as I was getting ready for this podcast. And all of them had been spanked as kids. And they all said very, very similar stories, which was they all had siblings who were being spanked too. And they all learned that if you cried earlier and cried really loudly, the spanking would be lessened. And so they all learned that as soon as someone starts spanking, you just start wailing right away, and then you don't get as many swats. But there was always that one sibling who wouldn't break, right? Everyone always had that one kid who wouldn't break.
That was
And
me.
and they would get swatted more. And I'm thinking, what lesson is anyone learning out of that?
Yeah. Mm.
Well, and that's the thing. Spanking doesn't teach
Mm-mm.
a lesson. It's purely designed to try to elicit fear or shame, to try to convince you not to do this again. And that it doesn't meaningfully move the child towards actual wisdom, actual understanding of, like, this is what I did wrong. This is how I could do better in the future. This is what I should do in the future. It doesn't contribute any of that. It just brings pain and disconnection that then makes it harder for us to actually teach the lessons that they need. And in so many ways, we kind of just leave our kids to figure it out, right? Like, I spanked them because they did wrong, and hopefully they'll figure out how to do right in the future. And it's like, that's not really going to work. They have to be, if we want them to, as best we can, within the process of child development, within where they are and everything that's going on, if we want them to do better, we have to start figuring out what better looks like. Like, that's, I think, the most powerful parenting advice we got when, well, our first one was still in utero, okay, was figure out what you want them to do.
Mhm.
Because as a parent, it's really easy to spot what we don't want to do. Like that is confronting us consistently.
What
The
we don't
things
wanna
we
do.
don't want to happen, they're really easy to see. And it's a lot harder to figure out, okay, but when my child is doing that, what am I actually wanting them to do? Besides just stopping the thing I don't want, what do I want them to do?
Yeah.
Because once we can figure out what we want them to do,
Mhm.
then we can begin to teach and encourage them to do that.
Mhm.
It's not just about stopping something, it's about replacing.
Yeah.
And this, I mean, this goes, I mean, adults have to deal with this too,
Yeah.
right? When we have some kind of, an addiction, a sin, something, you don't just stop by sheer
Mhm.
willpower, you replace.
Yeah.
And we do that for our kids too. Like that, no, you can't jump on the couch. You can jump on the trampoline.
Mhm.
Let's go to the trampoline. No, you can't hit your brother, but you can hit this punching bag.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Oh,
I want to say too, though, like when we think about the spanking them and like stopping the behavior, there's also this other aspect of like, I actually want my children to not fight and to problem solve and to consider one another's perspectives and to be willing to serve, not because if they don't, they're going to get a spanking. Like,
Mhm.
I cultivating a desire within them to do what is right because it is right. You don't do that with a rod or a wooden spoon or a paddle. They might get lucky and learn to do what is right because they don't want a spanking. They
Mhm.
might. Some kids are really smart and they'll figure it out. But that is not the same as their heart being pointed towards a good goal because this is what they desire, and
Yeah.
because it's rooted in a relationship of love and trust with their sibling or their parent. And that is the long game that we talked about, at the beginning, like being willing to recognize, if I'm going to cultivate this, it is a long growth process. It is a long journey towards maturity and understanding and wisdom. And I have to be willing to do that long work.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, and that's the work that God does with us.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that's how God treats us.
Mhm.
And I think so much of this comes down to our view of God. When we think of God as someone who is just happy to punish in order to get obedience, um, yeah, we're going to parent like that. But what kind of a view of God is that? That's not
Mhm.
Jesus.
No.
So this
And
has so,
that in the early church. Like
yeah.
we see the apostles confronting sin in the church, telling them
Mhm.
how to deal with sin. Big sin, way bigger than,
Mhm.
walking up to your brother and poking him in the arm, like way big sin. Sin that in the Old Testament was punishable by death.
Right.
And we see none of that in the New
Mhm.
Testament churches.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Because this has repercussions beyond just
Yes.
parenting,
yeah.
but it has repercussions for how we see God.
Yeah,
Yeah. And see,
absolutely.
that's, as a theology professor, that's part of what drove me to write this book, do this kind of work, is because, seeing how people misunderstand God. Because I mean, it's one of those realities, whether we like it or not, the way we view many times our father or our parents in general is how we just instinctively view God. Like we
Mhm.
just kind of naturally map that straight onto God. Now,
Mhm.
that's not accurate and truthful. All of us were raised by imperfect parents. God himself is perfect. And, there's a maturing process in learning to view God as he reveals himself to be, not just as we experienced our parents. Okay. But my goal as a parent is that my children could come to know God. My goal for other people, for the people who read this book, people who are listening to this, is that they would get glimpses of God through their parents. So that as they grow and as they read their Bibles and as they're looking at this, they would begin to say, like, oh, yeah, I know what grace is like because I've experienced grace in my home. I know what these things are like because, however imperfectly, I have actually seen them in action. And so our children are encouraged to develop a view of God that is accurate to who God is, rather than just mapping this kind of evil, not, well, evil is not the right word, but like kind of foreboding,
Yeah.
ready to punish,
Smite you.
waiting for you to mess up kind
Mhm.
of God, which is absolutely not. That is
Yeah.
evil. That is not what the Bible shows God to be.
Mhm.
And instead seeing God through Christ as the one who sacrifices himself, the one who gives us grace, the one who is patient with us, the one who draws us towards faith and repentance, that they
Mhm.
could see that through us.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I just want to say too, like, because I know some people who are listening, they're going to be like, well, you just keep talking about the New Testament. You keep talking about Jesus. You just, like, what about the Old Testament? And I just want to point back to the very first time God reveals himself to Moses. Moses is like, show me your glory. Lord, let your glory pass before me. I want to see your glory. And God says, I will cause my glory to pass before you, and I will show you my mercy. He attaches his glory to
Mhm.
mercy. And
Mhm.
that is important. It
Mhm.
lays the foundation of how we should view the rest of scripture, and how we should not be surprised when God becomes human in the form of Jesus and comes to earth and reveals the heart of God as a heart of mercy. We should be
Yeah.
expecting it.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I love this conversation. Seriously, this is going to be my go-to parenting recommendation from now on. Like this is what we needed. This is what the church needed. I'm so grateful that you brought in, like I said, the brain science and the theology and the peer-reviewed studies and everything. It was really well done. So, and the book launched, I think, last week. It is now available everywhere. The link is in the podcast notes. You can get it Amazon, anywhere you want, but it's The Flourishing Family by David and Amanda Erickson.
Yep.
And where can people find you?
Yeah, we're on Instagram and Facebook at Flourishing Homes and Families, and our website is flourishinghomesandfamilies.com.
Okay, I will put those links too. I know I refer to you a lot on Instagram and people are always sharing your stuff. So it's really good. It's a great, encouraging channel to teach us how to think differently about parenting and showing us that, yeah, there's ways to discipline that don't involve punishment. You can still be gentle and firm without necessarily punishing. So good. Thank you very much for being
Thank you
here.
so much for having us. Yeah.
I want to say thank you to David and Amanda Erickson for joining us on the podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I want to stress, we touched on only a few things in their book. In The Flourishing Family, there is so much more on how to figure out, what are good consequences for actions, natural consequences, so that we can have that kind of kind yet firm discipline that teaches kids, but that doesn't punish, but teaches kids, hey, this is what I want to live like. So they internalize your values and God's values. They have so much more on neuroscience, so much more on all kinds of things. And so I really, really appreciate their book. I think this is the book that the evangelical world has needed. So please check it out now. And the link again for The Flourishing Family is in the podcast notes. And thank you again to our amazing sponsor, Ever AJ, with their vegan Bible cases. Seriously, they're so pretty and they would make a lovely Christmas gift, or just a treat for yourself, which is also important. And remember, when you support our sponsors, you support us. So please check on that link. It's a wonderful small family business that they're just trying to get off the ground. And I would love to see them succeed because these are lovely and they're such great ideas. So check out that link in the podcast notes. And thank you. And we will see you again next week on the Bare Marriage Podcast, where we have some really special people joining us, Beth Allison Barr and Miranda Zepor Cruz, who are both professors. And we are going to look at the myth that 93%, when fathers come to Christ first, 93% of families follow, whereas when mothers come to Christ first, it's only 17%. And we're going to show you, hey, if you've heard that stat, it was made up. It doesn't come from anywhere. And we're going to show you why. So join us next week on the Bare Marriage Podcast for that. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.